All right, 2 o'clock. Hello, everyone.
All right.
Welcome to the California Acceleration Project's webinar with Professor Yang from Pasadena City College. Roger has been using standard-based grading and calculus for a while now, so I'm very excited to hear his presentation today, and I'm glad you've joined us. The webinar is going to be recorded, and I will be posting it on the CAP website under events if you want to share it with others later. I think that, Roger, are you sharing a few other resources with us that will be
Oh
posted
yeah,
also?
for
Okay.
sure.
All
For
right.
sure.
So there'll
Yeah.
be a few other things posted there also that you can look at. We do have 1 or 2 other events that are happening related to alternative forms of grading. So if you haven't signed up for those and you're interested, you can also go to the CAP website under events, and that's at accelerationproject.org. All right, Roger, with that, I think I'll just hand things over to you. Oh, I
All
guess I
right.
need to say Q&A. Sorry, Roger.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah, today I did set up a Q&A because the chat can get a little chaotic, even though it is open. I will be monitoring the Q&A. So if you have a question for Roger, please post it there in case I miss it gets, your questions get lost in the chat. All right, Roger, handing it over.
All right. Welcome everybody. My name is Roger Yang. I've been teaching at Pasadena City College since 2001. So been teaching a long time. And I'm here to basically share the nuts and bolts of how I use standards-based grading for calculus. So I was thinking just to get started, maybe we could do a vibe check, see how everyone's feeling right now. So I don't know if you want to like use your phone to scan this QR code or just go to Poll Everywhere and put this in the URL. And I usually do this on the first day of the semester just to see how people are doing. So feel free to respond to that. Right now, it looks like we only have 13 people here, but that situation may change. Why don't we just take a couple seconds to get that done, and then I will start our presentation. Well, oh, we have two respondents. Excellent. Maybe this was not the best idea. Oh, 5. Oh, okay. 5 is good. 5 is good. Myra, are we definitely confined to an hour? It's cool if I go a little bit over, right? That's not going to be an issue.
Not an issue on my end.
Okay, great. So I'm always like rushing through stuff, and I want to give people a chance to respond, and I kind of want to see how people are doing. So maybe another minute or so, and then I'll see what these responses are. All right. So let's see what we got here. Click on responses. Ah, nice. Interested. That's good to hear. Ready, curious, tired. I feel that. Distracted. Coffee. Very nice. Awesome. I was going to show you what my calculus class said. So let me zip over there real quick, and then we'll get started. So this is what my calculus class had on the first day, and this excited, nervous, and scared. That's a pretty consistent top 3 amongst all of my classes. And so I was just wondering if there's going to be any overlap between our responses and their responses. evidently I'm the only one that's excited, nervous, and scared. So that's fine. Let me share my desktop. That might be the easiest thing. So we are going to talk about the nuts and bolts of standards-based grading in STEM calculus. And I guess my whole thing, really almost my life philosophy, is built off of this idea of a growth mindset. And I'm sure many of you are many of you are very familiar with this idea. I really take it to heart with my own life in general. So I'm the kind of teacher where I'm always rebuilding my courses, always modifying my courses in an effort to try to get better. I feel like our students are always changing, and the technology changes, the world changes. So we, as teachers, we always need to adapt. So I really try to instill this growth mindset idea in my students, and that's really the foundation. So that's the very first thing that I start with. Um, and I know a lot of professors believe in this growth mindset idea, but uh, I think if we look at our grading scheme, you can believe in the growth mindset, but how much does your grading scheme sort of reflect that belief? So I guess that was one of the main motivations that I had for changing the way that I grade, is that really I believe in this idea of growth mindset. I believe in this idea of grit. But then my grading system in the past didn't reflect that in any way. So I kind of started to do this this standards-based grading as a result of COVID. So the first semester after COVID started, I started using this standards-based grading. So I guess I really love this quote, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. And this became very evident to me when I was teaching during COVID. Basically, during that time, and I'm sure many of you remember, things were kind of crazy. We were suddenly thrust online. We had to give exams online. And just like many students or many professors, I had a lot of cheating in my class. And I thought about it from the student's perspective. It's like, okay, whether I get into UCLA or Cal State LA or whatever the 4-year college of my dreams is, it kind of depends on how well I do on this class. And if no one's checking, well, why would I risk not doing well on a test? And why wouldn't I just cheat? So obviously I wasn't a big fan of that. And I wasn't at the time, I wasn't sure, how long COVID would go on for. So I decided to really revamp my grading system to align what I want with what the students want. Because fundamentally, I believe that students really do want to learn the material. But with high stakes testing, it's just they don't want to risk getting a bad grade and jeopardize their chances of transferring. So I needed to find a way where I could align my motivation, which is I want them to learn Calculus 1 skills with their grade. And I found that standards-based grading was a great way to do that. We had a book club at Pasadena City College where we read Grading for Equity the summer before, and I decided to use standards-based grading to address these concerns that I had. So hold on one second. So one of the big revelations that I had was we always talk about achievement gaps, and the motivation for the standards-based grading was this book, Grading for Equity. But what I realized is that achievement gaps are really opportunity gaps, in the sense that maybe the student doesn't have the strongest math background, but they do have the ability to, over time, improve and grow. So I really wanted to give them more opportunities to succeed. So standards-based grading lends itself very well to that. Okay. So what exactly is the standards-based grading approach that I use? I guess for me, like I said, I wanted to align a student's grade with whether they could do whether they understood the material, whether they could master the different standards of the class. So their grade totally depends on mastering a set of standards. And I'll share what those standards are with you in a second. The way that I address the opportunity gaps is that I allow multiple attempts to demonstrate mastery. So for my first semester calculus class, a student has 4 attempts for each standard. And in my calculus 2 class, I changed it to 3 attempts per standard. Presumably in calculus 2, you're at a higher level. Okay. And one of the great benefits of the standards-based grading is that a student will very clearly know what it is that they know and what it is that they don't know. And then I give them an opportunity to learn and then demonstrate mastery of the stuff that they don't know. So I guess when I think about standards-based grading, I think of it, along these 3 following points. So how do I communicate a student's grade to them? I haven't found a great way to do it within Canvas, so I sort of circumvent Canvas. And what I do is I create something called a grade card. And this grade card is where I keep track of their progress. The grade card is really a Google Sheet. And this Google Sheet, basically I share the Google Sheet with the student. And sort of the student has commenting privileges. And I, of course, have editing privileges. And then I find the Google Sheet is very useful for keeping track of how a student is doing. So I'll definitely spend some time explaining that within a moment. And as I just said, the student has common privileges. So if they needed to interact with me in some way, they could do that through the grade card, although usually that's done in person and through email. Finally, the grade card has all of the different standards that I'm trying to communicate, or I want them to master, and we use it to track the student's progress. Okay. So let me show you what my grade card looks like. So I hope we can all see, I have this Google Sheet open, and this is my fall. This is a grade card that I'm using this semester. So take a look at this. So the first thing is that I could definitely, if I click the share button, I could share it with the individual student. Right now I have it set to share with anybody with the link. So if you wanted to go in here, you could copy it. But what you'll see is that my class is, I have different modules. So one module is like skills for becoming a great student. One of the things I've learned in my 23 years of teaching is that the affective domain stuff is extremely important. And so the very first quiz that the students have is this growth mindset quiz. It's just a Canvas quiz that has an unlimited number of attempts. But that's sort of like the basis of the class, so that's where we start. I'll get back to this PPP standard in a second. I want to go down to the different modules that I have. So I have a limits module, I have a computing derivatives module, and I have an integrals module, and then I have an applications module at the end. So, what are the different things that I require for the limits module? Well, by the way, I want to mention that I go in this particular order for the most part. The only difference is that this epsilon delta proofs, I do that at the very end of the course. But I basically front load the course with what I consider basics. So I'm very into mastering the basics, and I'm trying to prepare my students for second semester calculus. So a large part of their grade, or I front load what I consider to be all the basics, which is limits, computing derivatives, and integrals. And then all the applications are at the end of the course. So if I go back to this limits module, you'll see that I have an algebraic limits standard. And for sure, I want to get into details about how I handled this situation, especially in light of AB 1705. I'm sure many of us are very interested in sort of how do we handle the whole algebra issue. And I have some answers to that. Computing derivatives, this is basic derivative stuff. All of this is pretty standard for a calculus course. I think you should modify, write your own standards, test what's really important to you. I always think, do I really need to have the intermediate value theorem as a standard? I still leave it in there, but that might change in the future. Does mean value theorem really need to be its own standard? I'm not really sure. I reduced it now to just being a Canvas quiz. And like I said, I have the applications at the end. Okay. So if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see I have all of these boxes. So how is a student's grade determined? Well, the first thing is, if I scroll to the bottom here, you'll see that I use a color coding system. Okay, so I'll try to explain this as I go along. So the first test that I give tests 3 separate standards. It tests graphical limits, algebraic limits, and continuity. Let's say a student takes the first test and they pass the graphical limit standard, then I would turn it green. Let's say a student did not pass the algebraic limit standard, I change that to be yellow. Let's say they don't pass the continuity standard, I change that to yellow as well. So I have a date updated, so then I'd put today's date 9/19/24. Okay, now the student knows that I updated it recently, and this is how they did on their first test. So each of these standards is basically graded as pass-fail. White means that we haven't assessed it or I haven't graded it yet. Green means you passed. Yellow means you failed your first attempt. So this student has passed the graphical limit standard, but not these other 2 standards. Okay. You'll see that I have the letter C next to some of these, within some of these boxes. What this means is that if you wanted to pass the class with a C, you have to master these standards. So I'm basically forcing every student to master algebraic limits. If you can't master algebraic limits, you're not going to pass the class. And to be honest, the first test is oftentimes the hardest for students because it's so algebra intensive. But I'm really trying to indoctrinate them into my methods where, you got to work and try to improve. And I give you multiple attempts to demonstrate that you have improved. So what happens after a student does not pass their first attempt? Well, I'm going to give them a second attempt. And I'm going to talk about how I manage the redos a little bit later. But basically, a student would sign up for a redo, and then they get a chance to try again. So what happens if they fail the second time? Well, then I change it to yellow. So let's say on the second attempt, they don't pass algebraic limits. They do pass the continuity standard. Now their grade card would look like this. So now they've used up 2 attempts. Let's say, so they sign up to do a third redo. A third redo, that's just for the sake of this demonstration, pretend that they did not pass the second redo. At this point, I would have some sort of an intervention with the student. I would either email them. Most likely, I would actually talk to them, and I'd really try to figure out what was going on. I'd try to encourage them to go to the Math Success Center, or really to come to office hours so that I could help them. At some point, I feel like I really need to get my hands on them in order to help them succeed. Um, let's say they took 2 redos and they still didn't pass. Then what happens now? Now this becomes red. Whoops. Sorry, I didn't. This becomes red. So what this means is you only have one more chance. And if you don't pass it on that chance, then it becomes this dark red. This basically means you didn't pass the standard. And again, if you don't pass the C-level standard, then you're not going to pass the class. So that's how that works. Is there any questions for me so far? Maybe this would be a good time for me to pause for a moment. No one has anything? Yes.
I don't have anything in the Q&A, but I encourage
Okay.
folks to put questions there if they have them. Let's keep going.
Okay, great. So one of the things that I want to point out, like I said earlier, I try to have all the basics front loaded. So you really need to be able to do all the derivative stuff. And you need to be able to do the integrals, in particular the substitution rule, fundamental theorem of calculus, and antiderivatives. Those are definitely super important. One thing you'll notice is that some of the standards, you only need to do one assessment to pass the standards, but other standards, I need to see it 3 times. So if it's something that's super important to me, I'm going to test it 3 separate times to really make sure that they have mastered the standard. So in Calculus 5A, I give tests, that's sort of like their first exposure to it. I give midterms, that's like their second exposure, or the second time I sort of reinforce that they really know it. For midterms, they only get 3 opportunities. They don't get 2 because presumably you've mastered it once already. And then actually I do give a single redo for my final exam. That's mostly just to take the pressure off. A lot of students are like, well, you're saying if I don't pass the standard on the final, I fail the class. And my feeling is like, yes, you really need to be able to take basic derivatives in order to pass this class. So, but I do provide a final exam redo to help them take the pressure off. Okay. So if we go down to the integrals module, you'll see that the Riemann sum stuff I have as a B level standard, and the definition of a definite integral I have as an A standard. My thinking here is that these are more advanced topics. So if you weren't able to master these 2 standards, I could still pass you in the class. But if you wanted to get a B, you'd have to master the Riemann sum standard. If you want to get an A, you really have to be able to do the whole definition of a definite integral type stuff, which again is pretty algebra intensive. So if we scroll down to the applications module, you'll see that, especially if you teach calculus regularly, you'll see that the last 3 standards I have are oftentimes the 3 most challenging standards for students. So I think that I would be, how do I put this? Sometimes students get upset with me because they're really doing well throughout the whole course, but they can't get the related rates word problems or the optimization word problems. And, they're like, oh man, I just missed 1 standard. That means that I can't get an A? And I'm really upfront about it with them. I tell them from the very first day, I repeat it throughout the semester, that you really need to master all of the standards in Math 5A in order to get an A. Because it always bothered me that, when I used a traditional grading system, students would just straight up sacrifice the word problems on the test and still get 90%. So then they could still do well on in the class overall without being able to do a single word problem. And in my mind, A students can do word problems. So in order to prevent that gamification of the student's grade, I'm like, you basically have to be able to do these word problems. Now, you'll see that there's a B level word problem and an A level word problem. The B level word problem is much easier. The A level word problem is more challenging. And during my lecture, I do like 4 or 5 different types of word problems. And the questions that I ask are basically variations of those basic types. So they kind of come in a variety. Okay.
Okay, so we have
Um,
a question for you.
yes.
Winley asks, how many C-level students failed would be considered failing the class? So I think she's asking if they fail on a standard that has a C on it, do they fail the class? And then
Yes.
she's asking, do you still use points for your test or only
No.
letter grades?
So these are great questions. Um, number one, if they fail a C standard, they're gonna fail. They're gonna fail the class. And my feeling is, I give you 4 opportunities to pass. If you can't learn it within 4 opportunities, then uh, maybe you need to try again next semester. As far as the points go, there's no points in this class. It's all either you pass the standard or you don't pass the standard. And that decision is sort of based on um, my feeling about uh, whether you understand, the product rule or whatever like that. I am not like a tyrant, if students make small calculation mistakes, it's definitely not a big deal. If they do the product rule correctly, or the quotient rule correctly, but then they make a mistake simplifying their final answer, I don't go crazy about that or anything. I'm looking to pass them. I'm not looking to fail them, but I need them to be able to actually know what the rule is and when to use it. Um, I hope that answers those questions.
Okay,
Uh,
one more,
mhm,
Roger.
Go
Do
for it.
students at some point decide if they're just going to go for a C or a B? Do you ever have conversations with them about what they're going to go for, like choosing bundles for specification grading?
That is a great question. And first of all, I very much like the fact that the questioner mentioned the word specifications grading. I think technically this is more specifications grading than it is standards-based grading. Um, so I was going to show you my Calculus 2 grade card in a second, just so you could see. But uh, there is this issue of, when I get to the end of the course, I have a lot of students that just sacrifice these last 3 standards, and they're focusing on uh, just trying to get a C to pass. And I don't know how you feel about that as instructors. For me, um, if a student has mastered the basics, I think they deserve to pass the class. Uh, Word problems, volumes, curve sketching, these are often weaknesses for many students. And, I feel like A and B students should be able to do these things. But for me, a C student, it's really more about mastering the basics to set them up for second semester calculus. And my hope would be that they could eventually do these topics, but the semester is a finite length. So I just put all the most difficult things more towards the end to allow weaker students or students with a less of a strong background the space to fill in those gaps. I want to show you my second semester calculus class real quick, grade card, because this is much more of a standards-based grading model where I have different modules, transcendental functions, integration, techniques, series and sequences, applications, and parametric and polar. And in this situation, it's strictly based on the number of standards that you pass. So just as a quick example, for this module, if you want to get an A, you would only need to master 6 of the 7 standards in order to, from this module, to qualify for an A, so on and so forth. So I feel like second semester calculus is a problematic course. And I also feel like it's much more difficult than first semester calculus. So my grading system sort of is different. But for first semester calculus, I guess I feel like A students should really know how to do everything. That's just my feeling. Okay. Cool. So let me see. Let me go back to this PowerPoint. I wanted to show you a GIF of kind of what this would look like over the course of a semester. So I had a student who really responded well to standards-based grading. And I wanted to show you, I created a time lapse of her grade card. And at the time, I had a slightly different system. It was basically only 3 colors. Green means you passed. Yellow means you got to try again, or you didn't assess yet. And green means that you passed. So let me open up this time lapse. Let's open this with Safari. So if you look at this, everything starts off as yellow because they haven't taken it yet. And then when they failed the standard, I marked it red. And then after she passed the standard, I marked it green. So if you look at this student had to retest like almost every test. But she ended up getting an A in the class. This was a second semester calculus class, but she ended up getting an A. And I really like this because it sort of demonstrates how a student maybe doesn't know it so well at the beginning, but with multiple opportunities, they were able to pass the standard. So I kind of like showing this. All right. So how do I manage all of my reassessments? Well, basically they get the first attempt is always an in-person test. So it's not like you get 4 attempts from whenever it's convenient for you. As a student, it's sort of like you're expected to keep pace with the course, and that first attempt is always an in-person test. Okay, my redos are done during office hours. So for me, I do standards-based grading in 2 of my classes, and each class has 30 students. So I actually need to hold my office hours in a classroom because I have many students coming in during office hours to retest. Sometimes a student can't make my office hours, so then they book an appointment, and we have like a retesting center. It's a little bit of tedious to fill out the forms and everything, but they retest then. Midterm 1 and midterm 2 are retesting core skills, and midterm 3 is all things graphing. So increasing, decreasing, concavity, limits at infinity, asymptotes, slant asymptotes, and then putting it all together. That's really what midterm 3 is about. The final exam, I test all the core skills that I really need them to know for second semester calculus. And that's given during the last day of class. And I have a final exam time during finals week. So the final exam time is for the final exam redo or any other redos that they have. Okay. In calculus 2, I do things a little bit differently. I still have the first attempt as an in-person test, but I also have a integral approximation or approximating integrals lab. It's like a computer lab. And I guess that's the main difference between the assessments. And in calculus 2, they only have a total of 3 attempts, not 4.
Roger, I have a
So,
few questions.
Yes, go for it.
All right. So every assessment type, the way that students can demonstrate their mastery of something is some kind of a testing situation.
That's correct.
Okay. And when they do a redo, are they redoing an entire exam or just the portions of the exam that they didn't show mastery?
That's a great question. So let me answer this question by showing you one of my tests. Let's see. So, okay. So if you look here, this is test one, and it's testing uh, three different standards. So this first standard is the graphical limit standard. So that's this first one. The continuity standard, I have it broken up with two questions. I have to have this question here because it refers to the graph in question one. But then I also have a continuity question at the end over here. I always ask the definition of continuity as well as sort of piecewise type situation and ask them if the function is continuous. Now, let's say the student doesn't pass the continuity standard. They would need to retest every question related to the continuity standard, but they don't have to redo the whole test. Okay, so the answer to your question is you need to retest all questions for that standard. And I'll talk more.
Does the student have to have a level of savvy that they can identify the questions that are relevant to the standard they need to master, or do you hand them a second test with parts of it X'd out?
So I definitely tell them which questions they need to do. Usually I don't have to explain, like they know that, oh, okay, the first question is graphical limits. Oh, you didn't pass L3, the continuity standard. You need to do the question at the bottom of the first page and bottom of the last page. Like, I'll just tell them. I'm not looking to have them identify what they need to know. So that's usually how I handle that. And I was just going to show you this test. So this is the question 3 here is the algebraic limits question. So they have all these different questions, including the squeeze theorem question. And I don't require them to necessarily get perfect on all of these, but they can miss like 2 and I'll still pass them. But you know, a lot of times actually they tend to miss the same 2, which is they tend to miss the one involving simplifying a complex fraction, something like this. And a lot of times they'll mess up the multiplying top and bottom by the conjugate. So did I answer your questions for you, Myra? Did you have
Yes,
others you
you
wanted
did.
to? Okay.
That's
All
good.
right, great.
Thanks.
I'm going to come back to this because I wanted to address the algebra issue, but I guess I had a plan, so let me just continue along with this plan. So how are assessments graded? So each assessment tests 1 or more standards. Each standard is just pass fail. And it's really up to me whether a student understands the standard or passes the standard or not. My feeling like is that it's pretty obvious. Like if a student knows, like you can tell if they know the quotient rule or they don't know the quotient rule. And I basically expect them to get every question right. And like I said, if it's a small, oh, 2 plus 3 is equal to 6, like, okay, I'll let that slide because that has nothing to do with the quotient rule per se. But I feel like that's supposed to be obvious. Okay. So I wanted to demonstrate how I manage my reassessment. This is supposed to be nuts and bolts, right? So first question is, how does a student get a reassessment? They have to take their original paper test and they have to submit a PDF of their corrections to Canvas. Then I post a weekly Canvas announcement and they need to respond with the following information. I need to know which test or midterm are you retesting? Is this your first, second, or third redo? And I need them to know which standards they will need to retest. Now, I make it clear that they have to retest all problems for that standard. Okay. I definitely encourage my students to do their redo during office hours. And when a student, after they take the reassessment, I grade it for them, like right in front of their faces. And I try to have a conversation with them. So if things are really hectic, like towards the end of the semester, I can't have these conversations. But early on in the semester, when it's not too busy, if a student doesn't do well on their redo, I'll talk to them about what they did wrong, and I'll give them a practice problem. And sometimes if they only get one question on their redo wrong, I'll give them a very similar question, and if they can do it, then I'll pass them on the standard. So there's sort of this, I guess, I'm willing to negotiate. I'm willing to work with them to allow them to demonstrate mastery. It's not so hard fast where, oh, this is it for your second redo, your first redo. You need to retest everything the second redo. If I feel like, well, I feel like they know it, I like to give them another problem, because one of the things that I really like about this method is I feel like student efficacy is greatly enhanced. In other words, I want a student to really feel like they know the material. And so students aren't really asking me for more points. They're asking me, can I show you that I know the standard? And I'm like, all right, show me here. And then I just throw a question on a piece of paper. And then if you could do this, then that shows me that you know the standard. So I talked about aligning our motivations together at the beginning of this. And I want them to learn the material. They want to learn the material. And they need to show me that they've learned the material. So I feel like things are very well aligned.
Roger,
So yes.
there's another question. I think you've already answered this, but let's just make it really clear. For your Calc 1, there are 9 tests plus 2 midterms and a final at question mark.
Three midterms and a final.
Okay. Are all of these taken in class? Question mark. How do you deal with the loss of class time for teaching the content?
So that's a great question. The first attempt is done in class. So I do have a lot of testing for sure. I test every single week. How do I have time to make all of this work? I do a variation of flipped classroom. So let me see here. Oh, hold on 1 second. Oh, I guess it's not obvious when you look here, but basically I have a bunch of videos recorded where certain parts of it are done on video. The main purpose of that is it saves me the time from having to write all this stuff down. Like, for example, these limit laws, I don't lecture about this. They watch a video on this, and then I just talk about it real quick in class. This example I did on the video, and then for this more complicated example, I did it in class, so you can see how the lecture notes look a little bit different. A lot of the theorems I'll do on video, and then class is sort of emphasized by working through examples, and then I have classwork for them to work through in class. So obviously, maximizing your face-to-face time is very important, but I don't know, after COVID, I really don't like teaching online. Like, I strongly prefer teaching in person. and I believe in testing in person. So yeah, that's kind of how I do it. Was there another question, Myra?
Yeah, I think there's just people needing clarity on, so there's 9 tests, 3
Mm-hmm.
midterms and a
Mm-hmm.
final. All of
Correct.
the redos are done. The initial attempt is done in class. Redos are
Yes.
done elsewhere, preferably
Office
office
hours.
hours,
Correct.
or by appointment if that didn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
What about, no one has asked this, but maybe it would help people understand. Sometimes I look at the length of people's tests, and a
Mm-hmm.
test is a 2 hour, 15, a lot of problems, that kind of thing. Do you
Right.
feel like
Right.
are your tests sort of geared for an hour? And do you feel like they're
Yeah,
maybe a little shorter since you're focusing on a subset of standards?
very much so. So maybe that's I'm so glad that you brought that up. Uh my tests typically test very few standards. The exception to that is the midterm three. Midterm three is all things graphing, and that definitely takes more time. So I pretty much give a whole class period for that. But in general, the assessments are an hour or less. So I was going to show you. Let's
Okay,
see.
one more question.
Mm-hmm. Go
Because you
for it.
mentioned the sort of semi flipped classroom, this person asks,
Mm-hmm.
if students are watching videos at home to replace in-class lectures, is this a
Mm-hmm.
hybrid class?
It is not a hybrid class for sure. Um, it's face to face. I guess, how do I put this? I am, I don't really like the fully flipped class methodology simply because not every student watches the videos. So um, I actually do lecture about all the stuff that was on the videos. But what I find is that the physical act of writing all this stuff down is very time consuming. So what ends up happening is that by having it already sort of on the lecture notes paper, I have it saves me the time from writing all the stuff down. But I still definitely talk about it, and I didn't mention that I um I actually post all my lecture notes to Canvas when I'm done. So um, I make students turn in their lecture notes, and that's going to be part of their PPP standard that I haven't had a chance to talk about yet. But but it's not hybrid. It's fully face to face. The main reason why I flip is to really address the time issue, so that we're really working on problems more than just writing down theory. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes.
Okay. So going back to how students sign up for their redos, I basically in Canvas create a I create an announcement, and I remind them of where and when my office hours are. I tell them how I want them to respond. How do they request a redo? I allow my students to comment. So to sign up for a redo, they comment. They respond to this with a comment, and I have a folder where I pack their redos and I write the student's name on there. And after I've packed their redos, I like their comment, and then um, so they know that they've packed it, or that I've packed their redo for them. I know that I've packed their redo for them, and then they just show up during office hours and I give it to them. So this was the method. I had many different ways where I tried to organize redos, and um, this is the way that I found to be most effective. Um, are we good, Myra? Were there other questions that have popped up, or did you have any other
We're
questions?
we're good.
Okay, good. So I had to address this earlier, but when I grade the reassessments, okay, first of all, many people are thinking, my gosh, this is a lot of grading. It's up to 4 times the grading of a normal class. And this is true, like, no doubt. So how do I manage all of this? Um, Basically, I'm the kind of person where I actually work a lot during my summer and winter breaks. I don't teach summer and winter. I'm fortunate in that I don't need to do that for financial reasons. So I really spend that time trying to recharge, trying to think about how I can improve my classes, and really trying to prep for the semester. And I frequently blow my courses up and start all over, um, which maybe isn't that efficient. But I essentially write like 4 or 5 versions of my test. I write all the answer keys for them during summer break. So, and it's all on my iPad. So when a student walks in with a redo, I just go to my iPad, the answer key's there, I can grade it super fast. Because I'm not giving points, I'm just seeing whether they understand it or not. Just check, 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 you pass. Or, well, you got these 2 wrong, I don't think you know it. And then we take it from there. Um, I try to give immediate feedback. So I usually have my students' materials graded within 24 hours. Usually it's within the same day. Um, it just works better for me to just bang it out of the way as quickly as possible. Um, so that's typically what I try to do. Um, Actually, I don't really email them the results anymore. Usually I just tell them the results because they're right there. But I'll uh, I'll record it on their grade card immediately because I find that if I delay any of these actions, I'll just forget to record it. And
So,
that's sort of how I handle things. Yes.
so Roger, I wanted to just highlight things that relative to all the angst I've had over the years with grading that I think would make
Hmm.
this faster. And
Hmm.
some of it you've already said. One is it's just like you got it, you didn't get it. You're not fussing around as do I take 1 point off, 2 points off. You're also not giving copious written feedback on anything, right? You're saying these are the areas you didn't get. Here's what you're trying to accomplish with the standard, and you need to go back and work on this some more and retest. So it seems like all of that, the stuff that I find frustrating with grading is the fussing around with points, the dealing with students about why did I lose a point, and the writing of comments that never get read. And then also there's no motivation for them to really read my feedback because we're now on another chapter learning something else, and there's no real opportunity for them to use feedback to improve their performance. So I just think all of this, though it sounds like a lot, resolves a lot of the issues that make grading time consuming and demoralizing. That you write all this
Right.
feedback, they don't read it.
Right.
And then you realize, well, of course they don't read it. We're now on another unit. They're not looking back at that material. So anyway, I just wanted to say, it sounds like a lot, but to me, it sounds like it resolves a lot of the issues I've had with grading over the years.
For sure. I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. There's this Zen story that I would share, but I don't want this presentation to go on for too long. But basically, having to make all these little hard decisions, like how many points is this worth? It's actually mentally very taxing, and it's if it's something easy like either pass, no pass, it's much faster, much less strain on the brain, I would say. Cool. So when I first met with Myra about a month ago, she was very interested in how I integrated uh, algebra into my calculus classes, particularly uh, in light of AB 1705 coming into effect. And I guess I'm very explicit about uh, what I'm doing. So I wanted to, I guess, demonstrate what I'm talking about. So I basically set the tone on the first day. On the first day, I do a vibe check. Then I break them up into groups. I get them to, when I do the groups, I count off people so they're not in the same group as someone that's sitting right next to them, because friends tend to clump together and I want them to meet new people. And then we do an algebra and trig review worksheet. And I want to show you what that looks like. So kind of looks like this. It's pretty simple. But we talk about like factoring, a difference of two squares, talk about this factoring, sum and difference of cubes. And I talk about some basic simplifying techniques. And then you'll see that I review adding fractions. And the purpose of reviewing this adding fractions is so that they can sort of learn how to add these or subtract these rational expressions. Okay. And then I also do this very basic unit circle review. So I kind of teach them how to fill in the unit circle. And these are ideas that sort of permeate throughout the class. So I really try to set the tone on the first day with this. Okay. When I'm doing the algebraic limit standard, I'm also extremely intentional. So I flashed it earlier, but basically, I call them different techniques or tricks. So I have like evaluating a limit by factoring and canceling, multiplying, evaluating a limit by multiplying top and bottom by the conjugate. I talk about, how do you know to do this? I talk about why do you multiply by the conjugate? Oh, it ties in with the whole difference of two squares idea that we talked about on the very first day. I talk about simplifying. So, we talked about this on the first day as well. So we're now using this in the context of evaluating limits. I talk about sort of one-sided limits. We talk about how do you evaluate piecewise functions. I talk about how do you identify where you have infinite limits, and then I talk about the squeeze theorem. Okay, so then when you look at my exam, all right, let's see, I have the key, I think. I don't have the key here, okay. If you look here, I literally asked them each one of those things. I have a conjugate question, I have a absolute value question, I have a simplifying complex fraction question, I have a squeeze theorem question, I have a piecewise function. Well, in this case, it's framed in the context of continuity. If I go over to my Canvas, if we go to my limits module, what you'll see is that I always tell them what the test day topics are going to be. And I tell them very explicitly what I need them to know. I list every single technique. I tell them, I'm going to ask you each one of these. So students are never surprised by what's on the test. Maybe the first time they take it, they're surprised. But all 4 versions of my test are structured in the same way. They're the same, similar types of questions. And so there's really no surprises. Everything is really very explicitly laid out. And am I teaching to the test? I mean, yes, but I see it less as teaching the test as more as being very intentional about what I'm expecting and allowing students the opportunity to demonstrate that they could do what I'm expecting. So let me go back to this. I said earlier that I'll pass a student even if they get a couple of these questions in question 3 incorrect. They tend to get the same questions incorrect. They tend to get this simplifying complex fraction question or this multiplying top and bottom by the conjugate question. I still want them to know how to do those things. So I just wanted to show you my test 2. So my test 2 tests the intermediate value theorem as well as the definition of the derivative and the equation of a tangent line. And my test two always has a square root function where I'm asking them to multiply top and bottom by the conjugate. I try to incorporate something that involves the chain rule because sometimes I've moved on to the so-called easy way to do the derivative. And I oftentimes haven't made it to chain rule yet. So they're still required to use the definition of the derivative here. And I always ask a question that involves simplifying a rational expression and finding a common denominator. So I'll oftentimes warn them that if those are the two questions that they got wrong on test one, I encourage them to submit corrections. I encourage them to sort of master these because these ideas come up in test two. So Myra, do you feel like that was an adequate explanation? Oh, wait, sorry. I wanted to show you something else. The trigonometry stuff. So, oh, I didn't copy this test over here. Give me 1 second. Let's see, here's my standards. As you can see, I have over the years, I've created more and more versions of my tests. So now I have 5 different versions of my test. So if I go to test three is testing derivative of constants in the power law, product rule, quotient rule, and trigonometric derivatives. So what you'll see that I do here is I have this test like so, but I wanted to show you for the trig derivatives part, I incorporate the first quadrant of the unit circle into mastering the standard. And then I ask them to evaluate these simple trig derivatives using this unit circle. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to fill in algebra gaps, trigonometry gaps as we go along. I've been doing this forever because what I found was that after COVID, my students actually didn't know the prerequisite material. And I guess it's not a funny story to share with you, but the first semester we came back from COVID, I had a colleague, she gave a test 1 for calculus 1, and she had 1 student pass the test and 27 students straight up failed it. And what are you going to do at this point? You're going to fail all but one of your students? It's not such a great situation. So I was pretty convinced after COVID that I have to do something to fill in those gaps. And now with AB 1705, I don't know if you'd call them gaps. They might just not have ever seen it before. So our college is using a support course model. And I think the support course combined with my approach, hopefully we can fill in a lot of those gaps. So on test 3, they have to know the first quadrant. On test 2, I have them learn the first and second quadrant. And then if you can do the first and second, it's not so much of a leap to get all 4. So,
So, Roger, I just want to say that for me, this is such beautiful instructional design because we're not just saying to students, well, you should know that, or you should remember that, and you should be able to recall it immediately and apply it in this new context. We're really saying, here are the core prerequisite skills, and we're going to name them. We're going to be able to identify them. We're going to practice them. And you're going to see why they are core skills because they're going to occur here and here and here and here. To me, that is just teaching for much deeper understanding and conceptual underpinnings of core ideas, right? This example with trig is really beautiful there. I was just going to add that I just finished interviewing a bunch of students from a Chafee calculus co-requisite course. And some of
Mhm.
them had trig, some of them had trig 5 years ago, some had never had trig, but they uniformly and independently said, I've never had trig or I didn't understand trig. And my instructor did the unit circle over and over and over again. And now I completely get it. And anytime I have to figure something out, I just go back to that. And I think, well, that's exactly what our goals need to be. You're not going to remember things all the time, but if you've got some strong conceptual underpinning that's visual even,
Mhm.
you're going to be just a better off mathematically. So I don't know. I just wanted to emphasize that I don't think this is, I just think this is good, deep pedagogy. And it's exciting to me. I think it would give students hope. I think they would feel like, I don't remember any of that, but I'm going to get it, right? I'm going to have the opportunity to get it.
For
So,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, I have two comments based on what you said. My first comment is I think if something is important to you, like you have to test it because sort of what you test communicates what the important things are. So if the unit circle is something that you think is important, then you need to ask them to fill in at least part of the unit circle. Uh, the second comment I have is that I found that like students really do want to learn this stuff. Like they saw it before, they didn't get it or they don't remember it, but they are interested in learning. And uh, if you give them those additional opportunities and you actually use it throughout your course, then they feel like it's really valuable. So um, I'm going to keep going in my presentation. I have more to say, but I was going to keep going because I'm sure it's going to come up again. So let me just see what else I have. Oh, I'm already on the advice section. Okay, great. So I've touched on some of these pieces of advice already. I want to discuss the PPP standard in a second. Uh, I highly recommend you do all your course prep before the course begins. So I'm writing all versions, full answer keys. I have all of my lecture notes filled out ahead of time. So that way, there's no prep. It's all just grading and teaching. Okay. Uh, I'm a very idealistic person, and I knew myself like once I tried this method, I'm not going to want to do things the old way. So I did something very foolish. I used standards-based grading for all three of my classes the first time I tried it. Please learn from my mistake. Do not do this. Choose one class and just do it with that one class. Because I did with three classes and it was so much work and it was so much stress um, that I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Okay. I mentioned that you might need a classroom to hold your office hours. Uh, Number four here is really important. You need a standard that'll incentivize a student to do homework. So um, I had showed you this PPP standard earlier. Uh, as I just said, I'm kind of an idealistic person. I've tried many times to not have homework be a part of my grade. In the purest form of standards-based grading, you grade them based on what they know, not how much effort they put in. And the idea is that the effort would be reflected in what they know. But going back to the motivation thing, whenever I tried to not have homework be a part of their grade, I encounter the following situation. This happens with even my very best students, my strongest students. They have physics homework and they have math homework. Math homework is part of their, I mean, physics homework is part of their grade. Math homework doesn't contribute to part of their grade. So of course they're motivated to do their physics homework and they skip the math homework and the math homework never gets done. So again, learn from my mistake. I just can't really get it to work. So what I have is I have this PPP standard right here. And that's basically participation, preparation, participation, and practice. And this is kind of like a effort grade. And what I do is I keep track of all of their standards on this grade card, but their Canvas grade keeps track of their homework and lecture notes. So let me go to my Canvas real quick. Let's go to assignments. So, oh, I don't have it here, but the uh, the lecture notes and the homework assignments are basically worth 100% of their Canvas grade. So if they look at their Canvas grade, that doesn't reflect how they're doing on the whole course. That just reflects how they're doing for this one standard. And um, I'm using Math GPT this semester, which is a sort of AI powered homework system. So I'm trying that. That's kind of the new thing that I'm working on this semester. Uh, you will have to whoops, sorry. You will have to explain your grading method a zillion times. So, I mean, you're watching this presentation, you might not even understand this grading system as I've described it, but after a while, students start to get it, and once they start to get it, they really love it, and it's really quite gratifying. Like the student comments that I get, and it's not even on like written evaluations. They just straight up tell me they just thank me. You know, they say, really feel like this grading system is working for me. I really feel like I'm motivated to learn the stuff, and I wish that my classes in the past were like this because they want to learn and they're worried about their grade. I mean, these are like the two fundamental sort of issues that we have. So if we can align the learning with their grade by giving them multiple opportunities, I mean, they generally respond really well to that. And one final comment I wanted to make is that I went through a lot before I got things to how they are right now. So Canvas has a learning mastery gradebook. I tested that out. That didn't really work the way that I wanted it to. I used standards-based grading strictly before I switched to more specs grading for my first semester calculus class. I had a lot of difficulty trying to organize my redos, just trying to get things organized. And what I found, how do I put this? You learn something new. I mean, as a teacher, you're always worried, like, am I doing it right? So, I was part of like a faculty inquiry group where we did the standards-based grading together. And, people were always wondering, like, am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? And my feeling is like, we're professionals, use what works for you. Like, you don't have to stick strictly to the standards-based grading paradigm. You can modify it and get it to something that reflects what you think is important and what works for you. So I had some instructors where they did all their redos as oral exams, and that really worked for her. I mean, her office hours were crazy. People were out the door, but she had all these great conversations with her students. And, uh, I don't know, I've found that through doing the standards-based grading, I have a much stronger connection with my students. I have a very good idea about what their abilities are. And students are also very aware of what they know and what they don't know. And this is sort of a very great benefit to standards-based grading. So I'm afraid that I forgot to tell you something, but I think that's mostly what I had in mind. Uh, did anyone or Myra have any other questions that they wanted to ask me?
Right now, we don't have any other questions. I
Okay.
wonder, Roger, if we could just
Mhm.
close. So you ended with this idea of it takes a while to get your system down. You got to sort of keep
Yes.
working at it.
Mhm.
Also, that it can look different for different instructors. There's not one
Mhm.
way to do that, but there are some sort of underlying principles. And I
Yes.
think you started with those, and I wondered if we could end with those. I think there were
Sure.
three
Yeah.
that are sort of, so I wanted you to do that. And then I had
Okay.
one last question for you about Yeah, so let's do that
Okay.
first. Let's just look at those.
Let's do that first. So, um,
Yes.
so I would say that and this is my interpretation of standards-based grading. Uh, I guess the benchmark is the grade reflects what a student knows, not their effort. So um, I've tried like zillions of different grading methods. For instance, a lot of teachers are like, well, I'll drop your lowest test. And I get why they want to do that. It's easy. It's easy for grade computation. Students are happy because their grade gets boosted. But then you could totally, um, you know, get an A in the class and not be able to do a single word problem. And to me, that doesn't really reflect an excellent student. So we're really trying to align what they know with their grade. And how do I measure what they know and measure that by, can you master these standards? So I think that's really important. And I mean, standards-based grading relies on intrinsic motivation. Like we're trying to build that intrinsic motivation, that growth mindset. But the nitty gritty, what actually matters is their grade. So be an idealist all you want. If those two aren't aligned, the students are always going to go to whatever gets them the highest grade. So if you look at your grading and you're dropping anything or you're replacing their lowest test with their final exam grade, I mean, you're not really checking that they really know everything that you want them to know. So I think that's the first point. That's probably the most important point. I think that's why it's called standards-based grading. But the second issue is the opportunity gap that I was talking about at the very beginning as well. Like, give them multiple opportunities, demonstrate mastery. Let's build that growth mindset. Like, if your grading system doesn't reward a growth mindset, then the growth mindset stuff is just all talk, right? Like, oh, I believe in the growth mindset, but you get one attempt to show me that you know it. I mean, that's essentially a high stakes testing. And I guess I'm trying to do low stakes testing until you get to the end where, okay, it's a final exam. Like that's the real summative assessment, you know? And I guess the third point is like, okay, so a student gets a B in your class. What do they know? What do they not know? Like, I don't know if you know. I don't know if the student knows. I don't know if anybody knows, but at least with standards-based grading, it's all laid out. This is why you got a B. You could do these things, you couldn't do these things. So if you want to get an A, these are the skills that we need to improve upon. So I guess for me, these are the three benchmarks of the standards-based grading approach.
Thanks. I think that's so helpful. And these are so clear and simple. We did have one more question come in about
Okay.
whether or not a similar format would be possible for online classes. Have you used it online, or do you know of folks who are?
Oh, that's a good question. I do not know of people that are doing it online. I was a little bit scarred by COVID and just the whole online experience. I did it for me personally. I found that all the stuff that I loved about teaching, I don't really get that when I teach online, and so it just feels very sort of impersonal and distant in a way. So I don't really teach online, but I do want to take this opportunity to make a comment that I had forgotten to mention. I guess I kind of feel like instruction and assessment should be done separately. And I feel like when I organize my class, it's different from how it was before in the sense that maybe in the past, there was a more adversarial relationship between the teacher and the student because the teacher is sort of responsible for their grade. And it almost seems like, oh, you ripped me off on this many points. You don't like me, all this other stuff. Whereas with this approach, I feel like we're aligned. Like we're trying to raise your level. We're trying to get your level to a certain point. So I think students, they want a high level and then they want you to help them reach that level. So uh, I think in an ideal world, I wouldn't actually be assessing whether they've mastered it or not. Someone else could grade it. Someone else could tell them whether they've mastered the standard. We get the test back and then we go through it together. We help them master the standard. So we're all on the same side. So I feel like I have big hopes for AI in the future. I feel like I don't see why AI couldn't grade things for us in the not too distant future. And then hopefully that would eliminate some of the grading issues. And if that was the case, I don't see why you couldn't do it online. Um, you could also have the AI create the assessments as well. I don't really know what that looks like yet, but I think the approach could work in the future, but I don't do anything online right now.
Um, so I think Ludmilla asked that question, and I'll just say, CAP did a webinar last week with a group of instructors from Hartnell and CSU Monterey Bay. And that group is sponsoring a 5-part virtual workshop series on doing standards-based grading. And I will send out to everyone that registered for this webinar the link that you can use to sign up for that experience. And some of those instructors teach online. So they've used standard-based grading online. So I'll send that
Oh,
out
cool.
after the webinar if you're interested in, and it's free. It's a 4 or 5-part series. One
Okay,
last
cool.
question, Roger, that came in.
Mm-hmm.
This sounds more like a motivation question.
Oh, okay.
She's wondering if you ever have to use her words, gas a student up to go for a B if they think they're a C student, or to go for an A if they're stuck thinking that they're a B.
Um, that is a good question. Would I find, how do I put this? As you ask this question, I have these visions of certain students' faces in my head because the situation does come up. A lot of times they themselves are, at first they're like, I'm struggling or whatever. But then as they experience more success, I find that they're the ones that kind of are trying to shoot for an A or shoot for a B. But I would say that, I'm always trying to encourage students to get the higher grade. Um, how do I put this? Because I have so many of my A and B standards towards the end of the class, I kind of know the student's level pretty well at that point. And uh, there's some students that are still trying to master the basics. And when you're trying to master the basics, I feel like you need to master the basics before I gas you up to try to get that A and that B. So I guess also the C standards are usually locked in before the end of the semester, other than sort of the final exam. So towards the end of the course, I guess the class roughly divides into 2 groups. One group that's really just trying to hustle to pass, and everybody else is trying to get an A. And that's, from my experience, what has typically happened. I don't have this situation where, a student in general, where a student is like, oh, I'll just take a C and not shoot for a B or an A. But I'm not sure if that's just because it's calculus, because my experience with calculus students and my experience with statistics students is vastly different. In fact, I've stopped doing standards-based grading for my statistics class, but I still do it for my calculus class. So maybe that difference sort of comes in the type of students that take the class. I don't know if that
And
answers the question.
I think so. And I think
Mhm.
it's not only the type of student, maybe that's a STEM major, but the fact that this is the first course in a sequence for
Mhm.
many of them, right? So
Mhm.
I think statistics students are often general education, taking it for general education purposes, and
Mhm.
it's a one and done, get my quantitative reasoning out of the way. So I could see
Right.
that they would be less motivated to, or wouldn't really have that intrinsic motivation to be able to quote unquote master certain procedural
Mhm.
skills or that kind
Mhm.
of thing. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, we are done with questions. I want to just
Awesome.
say this has been so illuminating for me personally, and I really want to thank you, Roger, for coming and talking today. I learned a lot. I will
Thanks for
be,
having me.
yeah, and there's some thank yous coming in the chat. I will be posting the recording to the accelerationproject.org events page. And Roger will be providing some other resources, I think an example of a grade card and some things
Mhm.
like that,
Mhm.
that you can also find there.
Mhm.
Next week, if you haven't signed up already, we have Kelly Spoon from San Diego Mesa coming to talk about other forms of alternative grading and taking those first small steps on getting started. And then October 4th, we have a group from Sac City and Sierra College who've been working with Teach Me videos that are an alternative form of assessment where students practice in groups on explaining things to each other and then record themselves explaining something, which I think has turned out to be a really fun and interesting and deep learning kind of an assessment technique that has really driven deep learning for those instructors. All right. Well, thank you. And I hope that you have a good rest of your week. And Roger will be in touch.
All right. Thank you,
Thanks
everyone.
again.